Evelyn Brooks had always believed there was a certain poetry to the way the seasons changed in her old neighborhood. Autumn leaves painted the sidewalks in tones of crimson and gold, and the scent of fresh rain mixed with the city's dust made the world feel nostalgic, like an old jazz record playing in the background of a half-forgotten memory. But on that overcast Thursday afternoon, the city's melancholic beauty couldn't soften the cruel finality of what was happening. The sleek black SUV pulled up in front of Cedar Hill Senior Residence, a luxury retirement home marketed as the last chapter you deserve. Marcus Brooks, Evelyn's only child, stepped out first, his tailored suit spotless, his Rolex gleaming as he checked the time on his phone for the 5th time. Evelyn followed more slowly, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched the small leather bag she'd packed herself the night before. She took in the building, tall, modern, too pristine. It felt sterile, like a place where people were meant to be forgotten behind clean white walls and polite smiles. A place where life wasn't celebrated but managed. Marcus's voice was steady, cold even. "Mom, this is for the best. You'll have everything you need here. Nurses on call, activities, your own suite. It's what people your age dream about." Evelyn said nothing, staring at the perfectly manicured rose bushes near the entrance. She remembered planting roses once years ago, when Marcus was just a boy, digging through the earth with his tiny hands. He used to run to her after school, his backpack bouncing, eager to tell her about his day. Now, that boy was gone, replaced by a man whose eyes no longer held warmth when they met hers. Inside the building, the air was thick with artificial floral scents and quiet, forced cheerfulness. The receptionist greeted them with a rehearsed smile, her voice syrupy sweet. "Welcome to Cedar Hill, Mrs. Brooks. We're so excited to have you join our community." Marcus leaned in, lowering his voice. "I've taken care of the paperwork. She's paid for a year in advance. Don't call me unless it's an emergency." The words felt like a slap. Evelyn gripped her bag tighter. She wanted to protest, to remind him of who she was. Of the sacrifices she'd made, the nights spent working double shifts as a hospital orderly, scrubbing blood off floors while studying to become a nurse. Of how she put him through college, sent him to law school. How she sold the only thing her late husband had left them, a small plot of land in Alabama, to help Marcus buy his first apartment. She wanted to say it all, but she didn't. Instead, she looked him in the eye and said softly, "You're my son." Marcus hesitated, something flickering across his face. Was it guilt? Discomfort? No. Evelyn knew that look now. It was inconvenience. The way people looked at a cracked phone screen or a wobbly table leg. An annoyance to be dealt with. "I can't carry your problems anymore, Mom," he replied. "You're a burden. It's time you let go." With that, he turned, phone already to his ear, walking briskly back to his car without a backward glance. The receptionist guided Evelyn down a long hallway painted in cheerful pastels, pointing out the activity room, the dining hall, the meditation garden. Evelyn barely listened. She felt like she was floating, watching herself from a distance. The other residents she passed wore faded expressions, some nodding politely, others staring vacantly at the television mounted on the wall. Her room was clean and bright, with a window overlooking the gardens. There was a bed, a small dresser, and a single framed photo of a field of wildflowers on the wall. The place felt temporary, like a holding space between life and the end. Evelyn set her bag down carefully and sat on the edge of the bed. The silence pressed against her, thick and heavy. She wasn't a burden. She was a mother. A woman who had buried a husband, raised a child, built a life from the cracked, unwelcoming pavement of a world that never wanted to see her thrive. And now, discarded like an outdated appliance, a knock on the door pulled her from her thoughts. A nurse entered, young, black, with kind eyes. "Mrs. Brooks, I'm Naomi. I'll be your primary nurse. If you need anything, just push this button here." She gestured to a call button by the bed. Evelyn managed a nod. Naomi hesitated, then spoke more softly. I know this isn't easy, but you're not alone here. There's good people too, in between all the bad." She left, closing the door gently behind her. Evelyn sat still for a long time before reaching into her bag. Her fingers brushed against the smooth leather of a worn, old diary. She pulled it out and opened it. Inside were pages filled with neat, cursive handwriting, notes from decades ago. Names, dates, bank account numbers, deals, secrets. Evelyn had once been the silent keeper of many things. Marcus never knew she kept records, thought his mother too simple, too trusting, too old-fashioned to understand his world. He was wrong. She flipped through the pages, stopping at one in particular, a bank transfer made under a false name. It was Marcus's transaction, a theft from a family trust her late husband had left for Evelyn, one that Marcus had claimed disappeared years ago. Her lips pressed into a thin line. The old Evelyn Brooks may have been a burden, but the woman holding that diary now was something entirely different. If this story of injustice and transformation moved you, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more stories that turn pain into power. The days that followed settled into an uneasy rhythm. Mornings began with medication rounds and flavorless oatmeal. The afternoons passed in a haze of bingo games and carefully scheduled craft sessions meant to distract rather than entertain. But behind the soft lighting and pastel-colored walls of Cedar Hill, Evelyn quickly learned that appearances were a lie, and the real stories whispered through the halls like wind through old trees. She noticed it first in the dining room. The long tables seated residents in groups, but not by chance. There was an invisible caste system here. The well-off, sharp-minded, and still physically capable elders sat by the windows, where sunlight painted their faces with warmth. Those considered too fragile, forgetful, or troublesome were quietly directed to tables in the back, where shadows clung to the corners. Evelyn was seated at one of those back tables. Across from her sat a woman with hair like white silk, styled immaculately into tight curls. Her lipstick was bright red, a defiant pop of color against her otherwise pale, lined face. "You're the new one," the woman said without looking up from her plate. Her voice was clear, deliberate. "Name's Lorraine." "Evelyn," she replied, surprised by the directness. "To hell with pleasantries. You don't belong here." Lorraine set down her fork and met Evelyn's gaze, sharp as a blade. "I can tell. I've been watching people get thrown into this place for 15 years. The discarded ones, the ones who still have fire left. And you've got that look, honey. Like someone left you for dead and forgot to check your pulse." Evelyn felt something tighten in her chest. Not fear, but recognition. A voice spoke from the other side of the table. "She's right, you know. We all got stories." It came from a wiry man with sunken cheeks and eyes too bright for his weathered face. "Hector." He extended a thin hand. Lorraine smirked. "Hector's been here longer than most of the furniture. Used to be a jazz musician. Played with everyone from Coltrane to Miles. They stuck him in here after his son sold his house and forgot he existed." Hector gave a lopsided grin. "And you? Bet you got your own heartbreak." Evelyn hesitated, but something about their presence, their casual defiance, the bitter humor etched into every word, made her feel seen for the first time since she arrived. She told them, in broad strokes, about Marcus, about being labeled a burden, about the diary. Lorraine's brow lifted. "A ledger, huh? Girl, you're sitting on a gold mine. I haven't figured out what to do with it yet." "Oh, you will," Lorraine said with a knowing smile. "Because places like this, people like your son, they bet on you forgetting who you are. They count on you crumbling. But you've still got backbone, Evelyn Brooks, I can smell it." Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of Miss Ruby's wheelchair gliding up beside them. Miss Ruby was the oldest resident at Cedar Hill, nearly 93, with skin the color of polished mahogany and eyes like sharp bits of glass. Though her body had weakened, her mind was still a weapon. She was notorious for speaking truths others were too afraid to voice. "Talking about revolutions, are we?" Miss Ruby cackled, wheeling herself into position. "Don't start none unless you plan to finish it." Evelyn liked her immediately. The afternoon faded into evening, but the four of them stayed long after the others had retreated to their rooms. In whispered voices, they shared pieces of their pasts, betrayals, lost fortunes, children who'd turned their backs, lovers long gone. And through those stories, Evelyn saw something larger. Cedar Hill wasn't a sanctuary. It was a holding pen for people the world didn't want to see anymore. But beneath the soft music and clean linens, a quiet war raged. A war for dignity, for the right to exist without shame. And Evelyn Brooks, freshly discarded, freshly angry, wasn't interested in being anyone's collateral damage. By the time the nurse came to usher them back to their rooms, Lorraine slid a scrap of paper across the table to Evelyn. "A little something for you," she said. Evelyn unfolded it later in her room. It was a list of names, 5 names, all residents. Next to each one was a single word, witness. Naomi checked in on her before lights out. "Everything okay, Mrs. Brooks?" Evelyn smiled faintly. "I'm fine, Naomi. Better than I've been in years." After Naomi left, Evelyn opened the diary again. She turned to the pages Marcus thought were burned. Bank accounts, bribes, political favors. Enough to end a career, to collapse a man. She traced her finger over her late husband's careful handwriting. "You always said I was too gentle," she whispered. "Maybe it's time you saw what happens when a gentle woman stops being quiet." Outside her window, the autumn wind scattered leaves across the lawn. In the distance, Evelyn swore she could hear the faint, sweet sound of a saxophone. The night settled over Cedar Hill like a heavy quilt, thick, suffocating, and impossible to escape. The halls grew quiet save for the occasional squeak of a nurse's shoes or the distant hum of the kitchen's industrial dishwasher. Evelyn lay awake in her narrow bed, the ceiling above her a canvas of shifting shadows. Sleep felt like a stranger she no longer had the patience to entertain. Her hand rested on the leather-bound diary, the edges worn from years of handling, the pages filled with secrets Evelyn never intended to wield. Yet here she was, a discarded matriarch in a place designed to silence people like her, holding a weapon more powerful than any argument or plea for mercy. She slipped out of bed, her joints protesting the movement, and crossed to the small desk by the window. The lamp's warm glow spilled across the page as she opened the diary again. The ink had faded slightly, but her late husband's careful handwriting was unmistakable. The first entry Evelyn reread was from 31 years ago, dated in the heat of a sweltering August, when Marcus had just turned 18. Loaned $25,000 to Councilman Reed's campaign in exchange for expedited permits on the East Side project. Money funneled through MB Holdings. Marcus's name to be added to the LLC this fall. Paper trail clean on the surface, but Evelyn keeps a copy for our records. Her breath caught. It had all started earlier than she realized. Marcus hadn't just stumbled into corruption after college. He'd been born into it. His hands stained by deals made in back rooms long before he earned his law degree. And her husband, God rest his soul, had kept her complicit in his own way, tasking her with recording every transaction, every name, every sum. Back then, Evelyn had told herself it was insurance, a mother's instinct. The old churchwomen used to say, "You can't trust men with money or power, child." Not without your own receipt book, but she'd never intended to use it, until now. A knock at her door startled her. Evelyn closed the diary and slipped it under a stack of old magazines. She crossed the room and opened the door a crack. It was Lorraine. The older woman held a flashlight and a grin that could cut glass. "Come on," she whispered. "We got a little midnight gathering you'll want to be a part of." Evelyn didn't hesitate. She grabbed her sweater and followed Lorraine down the dimly lit hallway. They moved like ghosts, slipping past nurses and orderlies with practiced ease. At the end of the East Wing, Lorraine pushed open a service door that led to a forgotten sunroom. Dust clung to the corners, and the furniture was draped with sheets, but the air was alive with a rebellious energy Evelyn hadn't felt in years. Hector was there, polishing a battered trumpet as if it were made of gold. Miss Ruby sat near the window, a chessboard set up in front of her, though no one else was playing, and two other residents Evelyn hadn't formally met, a tall, stoop-shouldered man named Arthur and a sharp-eyed woman called Sissy, waited with knowing smiles. "Welcome to the Cedar Hill Underground," Lorraine announced, her voice filled with dry humor. "Where we don't go quietly." Evelyn took a seat as Hector launched into a soft, mournful melody, the notes filling the air like whispered prayers. "We've been waiting on you, Miss Brooks," Miss Ruby said, moving a chess piece without looking at the board. "Knew you had something to swing the axe with. Question was whether you'd be bold enough to use it." Evelyn hesitated. "I don't even know if it matters. Marcus, my son, he owns the judge, the city council. Hell, probably the district attorney too," Lorraine chuckled. "Honey, corruption's like a spider web. Looks strong, but one sharp tug in the right place and the whole thing unravels." Arthur spoke up, his voice gravelly. "I used to work finance, corporate mergers. Marcus Brooks has a dirty ledger somewhere. Men like him always do." Evelyn nodded slowly, the weight of what she held sinking in. "I have records, old ones, ties to councilmen, fake companies, offshore accounts." "Proof." The room went still. "You serious?" Hector asked, lowering his trumpet. Evelyn reached into her sweater and pulled a single page from the diary, a photocopy she'd made years ago and kept hidden in a hollowed-out Bible. "Marcus thought it was gone," she said softly, "but I kept the originals." Lorraine grinned. "Then it's time we make some noise." They spent the next hour crafting a plan. Not reckless revenge. No, these were people who'd lived long enough to understand patience, strategy. Evelyn would gather copies of the diary's key pages, and Hector would contact an old reporter friend he'd known from his jazz days, a woman who owed him a favor. Arthur would dig into digital records using the facility's computer lab. He'd kept up with tech better than anyone suspected. And Miss Ruby? She'd work the residents, gathering testimonies, coaxing confessions, and exposing the silent abuses within Cedar Hill itself. By the time they dispersed, the first light of dawn bled into the sky. Evelyn stood at the window in her room, the diary open once again, and spoke aloud to the man she once loved. "You taught me how to stay quiet, Thomas, but you also taught me how to survive. And now, I'm about to do both one better." She smiled then. Not a gentle smile, not the kind worn by old women made docile by time, but a sharp, defiant grin. A burden no more. The morning sun barely warmed the manicured lawns of Cedar Hill, but Evelyn Brooks moved through the hallways like a woman reborn. The hush-hush whispers of aides and the soft rattle of pill carts no longer felt oppressive. They were background noise to a storm she now carried inside her chest. The plan wasn't just about revenge. No, it was about dignity, about claiming the last word in a story others thought they'd already written for her. Evelyn spent the morning copying pages from the old diary in the activity room. A younger nurse named Kendra manned the desk, nose buried in her phone, too distracted to notice when Evelyn used the printer behind the counter. She made 5 copies of the most damning entries, not the petty transactions, but the ones Marcus would never recover from. Bribing city officials to condemn properties, falsifying permits for kickbacks, laundering money through charities meant for underprivileged youth. Blood money. One entry chilled her the most. April 2003, payment of $75,000 to Judge Claiborne for favorable ruling in Brooks v. Johnson estate. Evelyn unaware of altered will. Marcus' sole beneficiary confirmed. She'd known. Deep down, she'd always known. When her sister passed and left property in Louisiana, Marcus had promised to handle the paperwork. Months later, she was told legal complications prevented her from inheriting. That land had been in her family for 3 generations, and it was stolen. Evelyn tucked the copies into an envelope marked for Attorney Williams. Lorraine had arranged the contact. A retired civil rights lawyer who owed her a favor from decades back when they marched together in '68. Lorraine might have been sharp-tongued and ruthless now, but she hadn't always worn bitterness like armor. Once, she was fire. "Remember, child," Lorraine had said the night before, "you hit a snake, you don't just wound it, you cut the damn head clean off." By lunchtime, Evelyn made her way back to the dining hall. Marcus was waiting for her. The sight of him startled her, not because she hadn't expected it, but because it was so soon. The man looked immaculate as always. Expensive suit tailored to his frame, hairline sharp, confidence radiating off him like perfume. But there was a tightness to his jaw, a twitch in the corner of his eye. He hadn't come to check on her. He'd come because he knew something was moving beneath his feet. "Mom," he said, forcing a smile as he motioned for her to sit. Evelyn took her time, lowering herself into the chair, her hand never straying far from the envelope in her bag. "What brings you here, Marcus?" "Thought I was a burden," she said evenly, her voice laced with steel. "Come on now," he chuckled, though it didn't reach his eyes. "You know I didn't mean it like that. Things have just been stressful." He leaned in. "Listen, I need to talk to you about some documents you might have. Old business records, personal stuff from Dad. The client I'm working with wants to make sure there's nothing floating around that could, cause problems. I can take them off your hands, store them properly, for your peace of mind." There it was. The panic behind the charm. Marcus was trying to clean house. Evelyn smiled, a slow, deliberate thing that unnerved him. "I do have something for you," she said, reaching into her bag. His eyes lit up, greed glinting in them like a predator scenting blood. She pulled out a single sheet of paper, a copy of the April 2003 diary entry. Marcus's face froze. His lips parted as if to speak, then closed again when he realized words would betray him. "You stole from your own blood," Evelyn said quietly, low enough for no one else to hear. "Took land that didn't belong to you, robbed me of my sister's memory, and you called me a burden." Marcus swallowed, but Evelyn wasn't finished. "See, Marcus, burdens are things you carry. I've carried this family, carried your mistakes, carried your father's secrets, but now I'm done." She leaned in closer, her gaze unwavering. "I'm about to hand you a real burden, baby, one you'll never escape." Marcus tried to recover. "Now, hold on, Mama. I can fix this, you know me. I just got caught up. I was protecting you, protecting the family legacy." Evelyn's laugh was sharp and humorless. "Legacy? The only thing you built is a coffin for your conscience." She stood, her back straighter than it had been in years. "I have copies, Marcus, with lawyers, with the press, and with the people in this place. People you forgot mattered. So go ahead, make your calls, pull your strings, because no matter what happens next, you're carrying this weight to your grave." The blood drained from his face. She walked away without another word, feeling his stare burn into her back like an old ghost, desperate to haunt what it could no longer control. In the hallway, Lorraine was waiting by the window, pretending to admire the hydrangeas. Evelyn slipped her a nod. "It's done," she whispered. Lorraine's grin was pure mischief. "Told you still had teeth." The real work would begin that night. The legal filings, the leaks to the press, the exposure of Cedar Hill's management alongside Marcus's crimes. But this moment, this reckoning, was the one Evelyn had craved. Not revenge. Freedom. She didn't just unburden herself that afternoon. She passed the weight back where it belonged. The news of Marcus's visit spread through Cedar Hill faster than wildfire in dry brush. By dinner, every corner of the residence hummed with speculation. Nurses exchanged looks, orderlies whispered in storage closets, and the residents, those who still had sharp minds and sharper tongues, became an underground network of whispered rumors and quiet alliances. Evelyn found herself at the center of a place she'd barely acknowledged a week ago. But the shift wasn't lost on her. Power, she realized, doesn't always roar. Sometimes it moves like a shadow, wrapping itself around those society thinks are powerless until the world notices too late. That evening, Lorraine appeared at Evelyn's door with a small notebook and a conspiratorial gleam in her eye. "Words out," she announced without ceremony. "You rattled his cage, good." Evelyn gestured her in, closing the door behind her. "Now what?" "Now," Lorraine grinned, "we build your army." It turned out Cedar Hill had no shortage of people hungry for a reckoning. The first to come forward was Sissy Devane, a former accountant who'd lost her business when her niece forged her signature to claim power of attorney. She spoke in precise, clipped tones, but the fury in her gaze spoke volumes. "I know paper trails," Sissy declared. "Show me where to look. I'll find his skeletons." Then came Arthur Boone, a quiet man with thick glasses and a slight tremor in his hands. He'd been a records officer for the county courthouse for 30 years. "I know how permits move, sweetheart," he said, his voice like worn gravel. "I know where they get buried. And of course Miss Ruby, who commanded the halls like a queen without a throne. I got ears everywhere, baby," she winked. "Ain't a nurse or aide in this place who won't cough up a little truth for a decent piece of peach cobbler." They met in the old sunroom each night, after the halls settled into the hush of sedated bodies and silent televisions. Hector's old trumpet case became their briefcase, carrying photocopied documents, notes scrawled on napkins, and phone numbers of contacts willing to trade whispers for favors. Evelyn marveled at the mosaic of people around her. Cast aside by greedy children and indifferent systems, these men and women hadn't died the way society expected them to, quietly, with gratitude for scraps. No, they were surviving, learning the shape of their cages, and dreaming up escape routes. Within 3 days, their network had grown to include half a dozen other residents. One, a former newspaper columnist named Eugene Hart, volunteered to draft anonymous letters to the local press, hinting at corruption in the city's elder care system. Another, Beatrice Moore, revealed she'd once worked in city records and still had friends who could be persuaded to pull confidential files. "This place isn't a retirement home," Evelyn told them one night, her voice steady as she held up one of the damning diary pages. "It's a waiting room for the forgotten. But I didn't come here to die quietly, and I'm not letting him erase me." They raised their glasses, plastic cups filled with flat ginger ale, but in that moment, it might as well have been fine whiskey. "To the burden," Lorraine said with a wicked grin. "To a real burden," Evelyn corrected. That same night, Naomi came to Evelyn's room after her shift ended, her face tight with something between guilt and resolve. "I overheard something," she said in a rush. "Marcus Brooks was here asking management for your files. I mean everything. Medical records, psychiatric evaluations, legal guardianship forms. He wants to declare you incompetent." Evelyn's blood ran cold, but she only nodded. "I won't let them," Naomi swore, fierce now, no longer the cautious, polite nurse. "This place isn't what you think. People disappear here. Stories get rewritten. But I've seen what they do to the residents who fight too hard." "I don't intend to fight," Evelyn said with a small, sharp smile. "I intend to win." Naomi exhaled, then leaned in. "I can get you into the admin office. After hours, there are files you'll want to see. Records of what happened to others, names, guardianships revoked, assets sold." For the first time in years, Evelyn felt a pulse of adrenaline she hadn't known she missed. Not fear, not hesitation, power. "Tonight," she said. Naomi hesitated. "Are you sure?" "I've been sure since the day my son called me a burden." By midnight, the sunroom conspirators gathered again. Naomi passed along a stolen keycard and instructions. Lorraine, Sissy, and Arthur would act as lookouts, distracting night staff. Miss Ruby would keep the hall phone line busy, calling an old preacher she claimed owed her money from 1974. Evelyn, armed with her diary and her steady rage, would go alone. The residence's main office was a glass-walled cage of faux modern decor and pretense, but the file room in the back was untouched by design trends. Metal cabinets, dim lights, the smell of paper and dust. It felt like an archive of other people's stolen endings. Evelyn rifled through files with methodical grace, pulling records on herself first. What she found made her stomach turn. an unsigned petition for guardianship. A pending order of evaluation for early dementia symptoms, written by a doctor who hadn't examined her in 2 years. A letter of consent, forged in her handwriting. And then, worse, other names. 15 residents marked as incompetent within months of large property sales or insurance policy changes. Names she knew, faces she passed every day. By the time she slipped back into her room at 2 a.m., her bag was heavy with proof. Evelyn sat at her desk, pulling out a final blank page from her diary. She wrote with slow, careful strokes, "This isn't a burden. It's justice." She smiled, a slow, lethal thing, and turned off the light. Morning came heavy with mist, the sky smudged in pale gray as if even the sun hesitated to bear witness to what was coming. Evelyn woke before dawn, the old ache in her joints an afterthought against the sharpened clarity in her mind. The pieces were moving now. The old diary pages tucked neatly in a manila envelope, the files Naomi risked everything to steal, the allies stitched together in whispered meetings and knowing glances. It was all ready. Cedar Hills residents went through their carefully managed routines while Evelyn's small rebellion simmered just beneath the surface. Lorraine sat by the window knitting a scarf she'd never wear. Hector played lazy blues on his battered trumpet in the garden. Sissy kept her eyes on the admin hallway, noting who came and went with the meticulousness of a woman who once balanced million-dollar accounts. At precisely 10:17 a.m., a car pulled up. Marcus. Lorraine smirked when she saw him from the sunroom. Right on time, like a cockroach sniffing spilled champagne. Evelyn remained in her room, waiting. Let him stew in that marble-floored lobby while she let the hours stretch. She knew men like him. He wore his arrogance like cologne, thick, unmistakable, and impossible to ignore. But today, Evelyn carried something heavier than arrogance. She carried consequence. By noon, Naomi brought word that Marcus had demanded a private meeting with the facility's director, Ms. Cartwright, and was already on the phone with his lawyers. He's trying to fast-track your evaluation, Evelyn. Wants to push the incompetency ruling through today. Claims you're a danger to yourself. Evelyn's laugh was low and humorless. Isn't it funny how quickly the dangerous label gets passed around once a black woman decides to stop behaving? Naomi's smile was thin but fierce. You ready? Evelyn reached for her bag. Let's get it done. She didn't go to the admin office alone this time. Lorraine flanked her left side like a queen's loyal guard, Miss Ruby wheeling alongside, her bony hands drumming against the armrest in a steady rhythm. Hector waited outside the door, his trumpet case slung casually at his feet. Inside the office, Marcus stood with Ms. Cartwright and 2 men in expensive suits who radiated the smug confidence of overpaid lawyers. The moment Evelyn stepped through the door, Marcus turned with a practiced expression of concern. There you are, Mom, he began, voice syrupy, rehearsed. We've all been so worried about you. You've been confused lately, making up stories, hiding things. Evelyn cut him off with a single raised hand. The room stilled. I see you brought your leeches, she said quietly, eyes locking on the lawyers. Good, you'll want witnesses. Marcus's expression faltered. This doesn't have to be messy, Mama. Oh, but it does. From her bag, Evelyn produced the manila envelope and placed it gently on the desk between them. These, she said, her voice clear and steady, are records of property fraud, embezzlement, bribery, and medical abuse of power. Not just involving me, Marcus, but 15 other residents here at Cedar Hill. Names, dates, amounts. And you're in every one of them. The blood drained from Marcus's face. Ms. Cartwright shifted uncomfortably, sweat blooming along her hairline. Copies, Evelyn added. Originals are already with attorney Harold Williams, and one with the Tribune's lead investigative journalist, Hector's old friend. Ever heard of Meredith Quinn? She has quite the reputation for burning men like you down to the ground. One of the lawyers cleared his throat. Now hold on. Sit down, Miss Ruby barked from her chair, the authority in her voice so sharp it made one of them obey out of instinct. Lorraine laid a hand on Evelyn's shoulder. You might want to explain what happens next, honey. Evelyn smiled, a small, lethal curve of her lips. What happens next, she said, is that you, Marcus, sign over guardianship authority back to me. You void the petition for incompetency. And you publicly relinquish any claim on the Johnson estate you stole. In return, I don't press charges for elder abuse, fraud, and financial exploitation. Though I can't guarantee your co-conspirators will stay quiet. People around here. She gestured toward the window where several residents pretended not to watch. They talk. Ms. Cartwright tried to regain control. This is extortion. It's justice, Evelyn snapped back. The kind this place hasn't seen in years. Marcus's hands trembled, a bead of sweat rolling down his temple. You won't get away with this, he hissed. Evelyn leaned in. I already have. Lorraine slid a prepared legal release across the table. Marcus's own lawyer paled as he scanned the document. She has us, Marcus, he muttered. It's all here. Dates, signatures, the Judge Claiborne bribe. Jesus. For a long, breathless moment, Marcus stared at the paper. Then, with a resigned, trembling hand, he signed. The room seemed to exhale at once. Evelyn gathered the papers, slipped them back into her bag, and rose to her feet. Now get out of my sight. Marcus opened his mouth to speak, but saw something in his mother's gaze that made the words shrivel before they escaped. He left. One of the lawyers followed close behind. The other lingered for a beat longer, then muttered, "Ma'am," almost like an apology, before leaving as well. Naomi entered moments later, eyes wide. You did it? Evelyn's face broke into a grin so wide it made her years fall away. We did it, Miss Ruby cackled. Told you, child, this ain't my first revolution. Lorraine slapped her hand against the desk. Now, she grinned, let's go tell the others the Queen's back on her throne. By late afternoon, Cedar Hill hummed with an energy it hadn't felt in years. The kind of restless anticipation you could almost taste in the air, like the storm-heavy sky before the first crack of thunder. Word of Marcus Brooks's humiliation spread like wildfire, carried in low murmurs and sidelong glances. The aides sensed it too, the shift in atmosphere, the invisible weight that had lifted. Evelyn walked the halls without a nurse's escort for the first time since arriving. No watchful eyes, no thinly veiled condescension. She wasn't invisible anymore. Look at you, Hector grinned, leaning against the garden gate as she passed. Queen Brooks walking tall. Evelyn chuckled softly. Not a queen, Hector. Just a woman tired of letting cowards write her story. But even as the victory settled over her shoulders like a warm shawl, she knew the final blow had to land in front of the people who mattered, the ones who'd watched her fade into the background, the ones who'd dismissed her dignity as easily as they did yesterday's mail. And so the idea for the gala came. It wasn't difficult to arrange. Cedar Hill's administration hosted quarterly fundraisers, faux glamorous evenings where rich board members pretended to care about elder care reform while sipping top-shelf liquor. The next one was days away, a perfect stage. Lorraine naturally took over. I'll get us a list of every snake attending, she promised. And baby, we'll find a way to make 'em squirm. The days that followed were a blur of covert meetings and calculated moves. Naomi secured access to the sound system. Sissy and Arthur compiled files from the admin records, pulling everything from falsified insurance claims to property seizures disguised as relocation expenses. Hector even dusted off his old tuxedo for the night, grinning like a kid at the prospect of raising hell in it. By the night of the gala, the residence's grand ballroom gleamed under 1,000 glittering lights. Tables dressed in white linen and gold-trimmed place settings. Guests in expensive suits and cocktail dresses arrived in waves, laughter loud, masks of benevolence firmly in place. Marcus was there too. He entered with that same air of unearned entitlement, his suit sharp, his smile gleaming, surrounded by city councilmen, judges, and developers. Men who knew what they were but pretended otherwise. He still believed he could control the narrative. that his signature meant Evelyn would shrink back into obscurity, that this storm would pass like all the others. He never saw it coming. At exactly 8:15 p.m., Evelyn took the stage. No one announced her. No polite introduction or obligatory applause. She walked to the podium, head held high, while the band fumbled to a confused halt, and conversations trailed into silence. Marcus frowned, rising halfway from his seat. "What the hell is this?" Evelyn's voice cut through the room with a clarity that made the chandeliers tremble. "Good evening," she began, her voice carrying not just through the microphone but through the bones of every person who had ever dared call someone like her invisible. "My name is Evelyn Brooks. Some of you know me. Most of you don't. And that's precisely the problem." A ripple of uneasy murmurs rolled through the room. "For the past several weeks, while you sipped cocktails and signed contracts, I was discarded, labeled a burden, silenced. But while you congratulated yourselves for philanthropy and progressive gestures, this institution, your institution, was stealing lives, claiming homes, erasing stories, and my son." She gestured toward Marcus, whose face was a storm of fury and dawning fear. "Led the charge." Someone gasped. From the back, Naomi gave a subtle nod. The screen behind Evelyn flickered to life. Images appeared, scanned pages of forged documents, spreadsheets of illegal transactions, property transfers, and photographs of the very elders seated in the audience's midst, faces hollowed by betrayal. Gasps turned to outraged shouts. Marcus surged to his feet. "This is slander! Security!" But no one moved. Lorraine appeared by the ballroom doors with Miss Ruby beside her, who shouted, "Y'all might want to let her finish before you start hollering." Evelyn's voice sharpened. "I came here tonight not to plead, but to reveal. Cedar Hill has become a vault for crimes disguised as care, and I'm not the only one who suffered." Behind her, more images flashed. Testimonies from residents, financial records, a signed confession from a nurse fired 2 years earlier for refusing to falsify dementia diagnoses. The final blow came when Hector took the stage, lifting his trumpet and playing a low, mournful tune, the same one he'd played the night Marcus signed away his own freedom. The room held its breath. Evelyn laid her hand on the podium. "This isn't just about me. It's about every person whose worth was measured in bank accounts and estate papers, whose voices were stolen, whose memories were sold. Tonight we take them back." By the time she finished, a wave of applause surged through the room, hesitant at first, then thunderous. Board members rose, city officials ducked their heads, reporters recorded every second. Marcus's face twisted in impotent rage as he was approached by 2 uniformed officers, now emboldened by the weight of indisputable evidence. Naomi's contact with the DA's office had done its work. "You can't do this," Marcus barked. Evelyn stepped from the stage, pausing beside him. "You made me a burden," she said softly. "But you forgot. Burdens are carried. And now, you'll carry this." He was led away. The ballroom erupted in cheers. Lorraine appeared at Evelyn's side, tears glimmering in her eyes. "Hot damn, woman, you just burned the whole damn house down." Evelyn smiled, not with triumph, but with release. "Nah," she murmured. "I built a new one." And the night belonged to her. By sunrise, Marcus Brooks was front-page news. Not the kind he was used to. Not the photo ops with ribbon cuttings. Not the grinning handshakes at city council meetings. No, this was the other kind. The kind where your face is shadowed by words like embezzlement, elder abuse, and fraud. Headlines screamed what Evelyn and her allies already knew. The golden boy had fallen. The local news ran the footage of the gala on loop. Evelyn's speech, the slideshow of stolen lives, the officers flanking Marcus as he was escorted out. The public devoured it, hungry for scandal, for the unmasking of yet another polished predator. Cedar Hill's board scrambled to manage the fallout. Ms. Cartwright was placed on immediate leave. Several staff members quietly disappeared, leaving no forwarding addresses. The state announced a formal investigation within 48 hours. And Marcus? He spent his first night in a holding cell, stripped of his designer suit and forced to trade tailored wool for an orange jumpsuit. The man who once strutted through courtrooms, who silenced enemies with a phone call, now sat on a hard bench as the press camped outside the precinct. Evelyn didn't watch the coverage. She didn't need to. She knew how predators unravel. It's never one cut that undoes them, but the 1,000 tiny fractures. The whispers, the looks, the people who used to answer calls now refusing to pick up. Evelyn had delivered the first blow, but the rest was always inevitable. By mid-morning, Lorraine burst into Evelyn's room, breathless, a crumpled tabloid in hand. "Baby, you seen this?" Evelyn looked up from the window seat where she'd been writing a letter. Not to Marcus, not to the press, but to herself. A promise for what came next. Lorraine slapped the paper down. The front page showed Marcus being shoved into a police cruiser, face twisted in something between outrage and disbelief. "They're tearing him apart," Lorraine crowed. "Investors pulling out, city contracts frozen, his wife filed for divorce this morning." Evelyn gave a small, tired smile. "Good." But Lorraine sobered, sitting beside her. "You did it, Evie. For all of us." Evelyn shook her head. "We did it." Every woman they silenced, every old man they discarded, every nurse too scared to speak, we broke it open. Sissy entered then, followed by Hector, Arthur, even Naomi, whose eyes still shone with defiance. Miss Ruby was wheeled in by a young aide, dressed in her Sunday best. "We came to see the Queen," Miss Ruby declared, a mischievous grin cutting across her face. "Word is, you leveled a man who thought God himself signed his checks." Evelyn chuckled. "I don't know about all that." But they weren't having it. "We do," Naomi insisted, "because it wasn't just about Marcus. This whole place was rotting. You cracked it wide open." And Evelyn realized then, for the first time, it wasn't only Marcus whose mask had shattered. The entire system, the slick lies of safety, the polite indifference, was crumbling. Residents she'd barely spoken to now greeted her with nods of respect. Staff whispered her name like it carried weight. That afternoon, the state investigator arrived. Naomi stood beside Evelyn as she handed over the remaining files, the diary, the forged documents, and resident testimonies. It was official now, and irreversible. As the investigator left, Naomi squeezed Evelyn's hand. "Whatever happens next, you change this place." Evelyn felt the weight of it, not as a burden but a mantle. That evening, Lorraine organized a small gathering in the sunroom. No gala lights, no reporters. Just a record player spinning soft jazz, a tray of peach cobbler, and the tight-knit circle of the Cedar Hill Underground. They toasted not to revenge, but to freedom, to stolen years reclaimed, to voices found. And as dusk bled into night, Evelyn realized she wasn't just a survivor. She was a force. When she stepped outside later, the sky above was wide and clean, a dark canvas scattered with stars. She looked up, felt the cool air kiss her skin, and for the first time in a long while, she spoke aloud. "You see this, Thomas? You told me to stay small. You taught me to stay silent, but I made my own noise." The wind answered, carrying the scent of jasmine and old unspoken things. Evelyn smiled, because while Marcus Brooks was left to drown beneath the weight of his sins, she had risen, and in her rising, she'd carried 100 discarded stories with her. In the weeks that followed Marcus Brooks's public undoing, the world outside Cedar Hill turned merciless. The media hounded every thread of his past, unearthing more rot with every broadcast. Business associates vanished. Bank accounts were frozen. His once slick name now floated alongside words like disgraced, fraudster, and predator. Marcus had become a cautionary tale, a ghost of ambition unchecked. Inside Cedar Hill, life reshaped itself in quieter but no less powerful ways. The board resigned in disgrace. State auditors swept through the facility, demanding records, interviewing residents, and uncovering a trail of abuse that stretched back decades. Evelyn watched it unfold like a tide she no longer needed to control. She had lit the match. The fire took care of the rest, and when the legal documents arrived, signed and notarized, it felt less like victory and more like a release. Guardianship revoked, estate claim nullified, title deed restored. The Johnson land, that stretch of earth her sister had died protecting, that Marcus had stolen in secret, was hers again. Naomi delivered the papers with misted eyes. "It's done," she whispered. Evelyn held them for a long moment, fingers tracing the ink. She thought she might feel triumphant, but what filled her chest was something quieter. A slow, steady warmth. Not revenge, not gloating. Closure. The residents gathered that afternoon in the garden, not for a planned activity, but because they wanted to. Because something sacred had settled over the grounds. Laughter returned to Cedar Hill. Hector's trumpet became a fixture again in the afternoons. Lorraine stopped pretending to knit scarves she'd never finish, and started teaching a few of the younger aides how to play dominoes the way her daddy taught her, loud and with plenty of swearing. Miss Ruby demanded a new chess set, and insisted on playing it in the open sunroom, where she held court like a queen among loyal subjects. And Evelyn? She packed her few belongings. The day she left Cedar Hill, a crowd gathered by the front doors. Not staff pretending to care, but residents leaning on walkers, wheelchairs lined up, allies with crooked smiles. "You sure about this?" Lorraine asked, squeezing Evelyn's hand. "I've got work to do." Arthur pressed a slip of paper into her palm. "That property's been waiting on you. Build something, Miss Brooks. A place where old souls don't have to disappear." Evelyn tucked the note into her pocket. "That's exactly what I plan to do." Naomi came last, eyes damp. "This place is different now because of you." Evelyn shook her head. "It's different because all of you decided it could be." She stepped out into the sharp, clean air, her bag light, the future wide. The drive back to the city felt unreal. Streets she hadn't seen in months. Neighborhoods that bore the same cracked sidewalks and overgrown yards, but seemed different somehow. Or maybe she was. At the Johnson land, the sun hung low, bathing the fields in gold. The old house was gone, sold and bulldozed long ago. But the land was still there. Untamed, stubborn, waiting. Evelyn stood on that earth, feeling its pulse in her bones. The same soil her mother's hands once tilled. The same earth her sister fought to keep. And now hers again. She knelt, scooped a fistful of dirt and let it run between her fingers. "I'm home," she whispered, not just here but inside herself. Free of the burden. Free of the lies. Ready. She didn't need a monument for what came before. The land itself was enough. It would become something new, a sanctuary for those like her, a place where no one would be discarded. No one would be called too old or too broken or too much work. A home. Not for the forgotten, but for the remembered. Spring arrived like a promise. The first shy green leaves unfurled on the trees surrounding the Johnson land, and the air carried that raw sweetness of rebirth. Evelyn Brooks stood at the edge of her reclaimed property, watching workers haul beams and frame walls where empty ground had once stretched. The land that Marcus tried to steal, the place her ancestors bled into, would no longer be a silent witness to erasure. The sign near the road read, "The Brooks Haven for Elders." No frills, no patronizing slogans about golden years or second acts. Just a clean, sturdy promise. Here, you matter. Evelyn spent her mornings with the architects and her afternoons with the old folks from Cedar Hill, many of whom visited regularly now, curious about the place that was rising like a phoenix from long-forgotten soil. Lorraine showed up on day 3, clutching a bottle of too sweet wine and declaring herself head of entertainment. Hector arrived soon after, carrying his trumpet and a folder of jazz standards he swore would be mandatory for Sunday afternoons. Even Miss Ruby made the trek, despite protests from aides at the now reforming Cedar Hill. "Can't let you start a revolution without me," she rasped, smiling through the weariness in her bones. What Evelyn built wasn't a care facility, It was a sanctuary. No white walls smelling of disinfectant, no forced bingo games. There were vegetable gardens, reading porches, a music room where Hector's horn was the only rule, and rows of rooms with wide windows, each named after a woman or man Evelyn once knew who'd been discarded before their story was done. And the word spread. Families who'd once been too proud or too ashamed to claim their elders began to call, not out of obligation, but curiosity, out of a need to make amends. And when they did, Evelyn met them not with bitterness, but with rules. Here, you show up. Here, you listen. Here, you understand that no one is disposable. The state awarded Brooks Haven a grant within 6 months. The same reporters who'd filmed Marcus Brooks' fall from grace now filmed Evelyn's speeches about dignity, about the quiet violence of erasure, and the power in reclaiming space. At night, Evelyn sat on the porch of the main house, the same spot where her mother once shelled peas, watching the stars blink awake. She thought about the road that brought her here, the betrayal, the bruising grief, the old diary that had been both burden and sword. She missed her sister, the old church women, even Thomas in his flawed, complicated way. And yes, sometimes she missed the boy Marcus used to be before greed hollowed him out. But grief was a strange thing. It stopped asking for permission. It simply became a part of you. Evelyn had carried so many ghosts for so long she no longer feared them. Instead, she set places for them at the table. On what would have been her mother's birthday, they held the first big dinner at Brooks Haven. Long tables, mismatched chairs, casseroles made from half-remembered recipes. Hector played old jazz standards. Lorraine told stories too raunchy for polite company. And Miss Ruby whipped every chess player in sight. And Evelyn looked around at faces, brown, wrinkled, scarred, alive, and knew she'd done what so many said couldn't be done. She turned pain into power, turned exile into sanctuary, turned a burden into a legacy. And in that moment, as laughter rolled out across the fields and the wind stirred the tall grass, Evelyn Brooks felt not victorious, but complete. The land was hers again. The story was hers again. And for the first time in her long, weathered life, she was free. The past would always leave its fingerprints, but Evelyn had built something that would outlast the shadows. A place where no one would be told they were too old, too difficult, or too inconvenient to matter. Because when you've carried the burden long enough, you learn how to set it down, and teach others how to rise. If this story of injustice and transformation moved you, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more stories that turn pain into power.